Hello, everyone. I'm Ian Nicholas, joined by my usual co-host, Dylan Pescatore, for another great episode of the Beyond the Whistle podcast, where we have an awesome guest, Pete Pranica, the voice of the NBA's Memphis Grizzlies. He's been there for more than a decade and a half, and he's one of the best in the NBA to do it. Mr. Pranica, how are you doing during this quarantine without live sports, and how excited are you for the NBA's return later in July?
Well, it's been a struggle. I've played some golf. I'm a licensed pilot, so I've flown my plane around a little bit. I also had the added burden. My mother passed away in February up in Wisconsin, so I've been trying to clean her house out and get it ready for sale. So that's kind of how I passed the time, but certainly not how I expected March and April and May to turn out for me. So to answer you, the other part of it, guys, I'm very excited that we should be having NBA basketball real soon. Obviously, some things concerning with what's going on in Florida right now, but I have faith in Adam Silver and the NBA and the Players Association that they have come up with a good plan, and hopefully they'll be able to pull it off, and we'll have our 8 seeding games and playoff games and go from there.
Yep, it's going to be very exciting to see what the Memphis Grizzlies do. You know, it's a really young team that they have this year with John Morant and Jaren Jackson. But before we dive into the team that you're covering, let's talk about your start in sports broadcasting. You went to an all-boys Catholic high school in the middle of the country, as you put it, in Wisconsin, the same high school Kevin Harlan went to just 4 years before you graduated. And you said that you and your friends were able to do football, basketball, and hockey play-by-play up in Wisconsin at the radio station at your high school. Dylan and I had the privilege of calling games at our high school in Connecticut. But tell us about your first experience in play-by-play. How did it all come together?
Well, it was a fairly small school, and a lot of the guys wanted to play sports. So those of us who wanted to talk about sports, it wasn't quite as competitive. But I remember we started out. I think I was a sophomore in high school, and we'd just do JV games, and the upperclassmen would do the varsity games, and you just sit at the top of the field house, and you'd have the old Shure mixer. And I think even for the first broadcast, I had a stick microphone, didn't have a headset yet, had a scorebook, so kept my own stats, and had a lot of fun with it. The highlight for me was when I was a senior, our basketball team was really, really good, and they advanced to the state championship. And in those days, there was a separate athletics organization for private schools and public schools, and the public schools played at the field house in Madison, Wisconsin, and the private schools played at the Milwaukee Arena in Milwaukee. Wow. And of course, growing up as a Milwaukee Bucks fan, I mean, this was like really, really cool.
Yeah.
And in those days, I mean, this is 1982. So, local sports radio really hadn't come of age at this point. So our little 10-watt station, we were the only originating station for the state championship game from Milwaukee.
A lot of pressure.
So it was pretty cool. I mean, it was a 10-watt radio station. The signal didn't go very far, but for us, it was a big thing, and I was very glad to have had that experience because it did give me a leg up. I mean, nowadays a lot of high schools do have opportunities, whether it's streaming or radio stations or whatever, so that you can get experience at a younger age. In those days, 10-watt radio stations were almost impossible to find, and Kevin and I were both very, very lucky to get those reps early.
Definitely.
So Ian said that you called basketball, football, and hockey throughout high school, 3 pretty different sports, and you say your basketball team was so good in that senior year. Was that the moment that you knew basketball was your sport to call?
I really don't know. The way that it turned out, because my journey to the NBA routed through Notre Dame and George Blaha, who has been the voice of the Pistons since the mid-'70s. And he was the guy who listened to my tape, gave it to his boss, and when there were conflicts with college football on the weekend or pro football on the weekend in Detroit, that opened the door for me. Now, if I had given my tape to a football broadcaster, maybe things turn out differently. I don't know. Basketball has always been my favorite because it is so fast paced and there's a lot of stuff going on and you're playing almost every other day. Whereas with football, it's once a week. But yeah, you just don't know. My career could have turned out very, very differently if I had given my tape to somebody else who was doing something else, and maybe I would have ended up with another sport. But I'm very pleased with where I am.
Yeah, definitely. We've had an awesome run for a lot of different teams in the NBA, now with the Grizzlies. But before talking about your NBA career, and going back to your time at Notre Dame, you actually called girls' basketball games on tape. You just asked to do it, and I guess that was your first experience in play-by-play at the college level. Why did you choose Notre Dame, which you've mentioned doesn't really have too much of a broadcasting program? What intrigued you in going to South Bend?
I was a Catholic kid in the Midwest.
Yeah.
I mean, I, I remember that, when UCLA had, I think it was the 88 game unbeaten streak, and they go into the Athletic and Convocation Center, and Notre Dame ends that winning streak.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember watching that on TV and seeing the tremendous enthusiasm of the student body. And that was very appealing to me. The other piece of it, and Lou Holtz has always said that going to Notre Dame isn't a 4-year decision, it's a 40-year decision,
Mm-hmm.
because the alumni group is so strong. And when you look at the fact that Notre Dame does not have a true broadcast program, and yet, okay, Ted Robinson out on the West Coast, George Blaha in Detroit, Bob Fitzgerald at Golden State, a guy who has probably been retired for a bit of time now, Tim Ryan, who did a million things for CBS, Don Criqui, who was the voice of the NFL forever,
Yeah.
and John Michael now at the Cleveland Cavaliers. So, I mean, it was an idea that I knew that I would go to a school that had a really good athletics program. So at least I'd be around good athletics. And hopefully I could leverage the alumni network then to get me to a position where, I might be able to make my own luck. And that's exactly what happened, because after I graduated from Notre Dame, I worked for a small station in Sturgeon Bay, Wisconsin.
Mm-hmm.
And I got tired of that. I got tired of making $5 an hour and turning on the transmitter at 5 a.m. and reading the school lunch menus and things like that. And the Notre Dame Alumni Association offered me a job, and then that provided me with the opportunity to make contact with George Blaha. And that's why, if you want to make God laugh, just tell him your plans, and something else will happen.
Something that we always hear from, and in the next few years we'll go through, is learning from college and learning from experiences through those 4 years, hopefully, if we all get through those. What's something that you learned from college, just something that points out in broadcasting?
It's about time management. And it's also about understanding what you love to do and to follow through on that. I think that when I was at Notre Dame, my grades were okay as a freshman and as a sophomore,
Mm-hmm.
as I went through the required subjects. But once I really got into my major, and it's ironic that the more time I spent in the student radio station, my grades actually got better. Not exactly sure why that was, but I think it's about time management, and it's about understanding who you are, what drives you. If you're going to get into this business because you think you're going to make a ton of money and you're going to be famous, those are the wrong reasons to get into this. And I think that college is a really good time for you to understand how difficult this can be. Is this something that really feeds you? I'm very lucky because my job feeds me. It's a huge, huge part of me. There's more to me than being a sportscaster, obviously, but think of all the people who go to a job and it doesn't feed them. It just doesn't feed their spirit. Doesn't make their heart sing, as a friend of mine used to say. And I think college is a good time to experiment with that. Is this something I really want to do? Or is it just, oh, what the heck? It's fun.
Yeah, I mean, Dylan and I do this, not just it's fun because we love talking sports and this is what we're born to do. And we found an outlet already in high school where we can use that and put it to good use. And we're having a lot of fun with it as well. So hopefully we continue that at the college level. So as you mentioned a second ago, you spent 6 years on and off part-time with the Detroit Pistons before doing work with the Trailblazers and now the Grizzlies down the line. What were those years with Detroit like, and what were some of the biggest challenges doing those NBA games early on in your broadcasting career?
Well, the big challenge was you weren't around the team on a day-to-day basis. In that time period, I actually was working at Notre Dame. So I was in South Bend. And most of the games I ended up doing were on the road. So I would fly commercial, and then I would meet the team that was flying charter. And you didn't have the relationships with Chuck Daly at the time, so you were kind of the outsider.
Yeah.
And there was a little bit of being self-conscious about it. And I think the other big challenge too is the research and the stats that we have today. We certainly did not have back then. And so I would do these games, and they were always on weekends, and you're just kind of parachuting in for one game. And one game I'm working with Vinnie Johnson, one game I'm working with Greg Kelser, and it's just kind of a moving target. But
Mm-hmm.
and just even navigating the format of when I was doing games in college, like, okay, there was always a timeout, and we take a break. But now there are so many other elements that you have to get into, whether it's promotional reads or trying to say, well, for our network stations that are going to stay with us, here's the post game show. For our network stations that are leaving us, goodbye, have a good night. So there were just some other things that that were foreign to me in that time period, and those were probably the hardest things to deal with.
And as you learn throughout the years, and something that we ask to almost all of our guests is, how do you fill time and how do you connect with your analysts? When do you know when to pull them in, and when do you know to just take over?
Well, let me give you kind of a double answer on it, Dylan, because radio and TV are totally different animals.
Yeah.
Radio, as a play-by-play guy, you are the show. And as far as working with an analyst on radio, in the NBA, you got to be super crisp with your call. Ball goes in, score, time, layout, and hopefully your analyst will pick up the cue. Some guys will hit their analyst on the shoulder, like, okay, it's your turn to talk. I would just try to, and I would tell every analyst that I would work with on radio, it's like, here's kind of what I'm going to do. Something happens, I'm going to put a cap on it by giving the time and the score. If you hear me give the time and the score, and Joe Dumars now has 14, that's your cue to jump in while the other team's bringing the ball up the floor. So there was a bit of communication before the broadcast. When it comes to television, that's where the analyst is supposed to shine. And how you develop chemistry with your analyst, I mean, it helps if you have a similar approach to the game. But again, a lot of it is off-air conversations. I'm really lucky with Brevin Knight. He is, even though he's been retired for 10, 12 years, he's still fairly current with a lot of assistant coaches, picks up a lot of valuable information. And so our conversations will be, what do you want to talk about? What's important to you? When there's a commercial break, we're not taking the headsets off and looking at the dance team or Red Panda or whoever. We're talking to each other and saying, okay, where do you want to go with this? What did you notice in that last segment? And is there something that you want to point out? And this was really hammered home to me. Kevin Harlan and I are good friends, and Kevin will invite me up to the booth when he's doing preseason games at Lambeau. And I would watch him and Rich Gannon interact as an outsider, and you're watching their chemistry, and they've been together for a long period of time. And, again, there's a break in the action, slip off the headset. Hey, Rich, what did you see from Aaron Rodgers there? What did you see from Donald Driver there? Where do you want to go? And so then when you come back, then as a play-by-play guy, you can immediately tee him up. And what I noticed too is, and in football, it's easier because there's more breaks between plays, a lot of eye contact with the analyst. And even in the NBA, if there's something that I really feel is important to say, I will literally put my arm around Brevin and just give him a squeeze on the shoulder, and we'll have a face-to-face conversation. That's pretty much how we work. As far as chemistry, hopefully your analyst becomes a really good friend, and Brevin and I are best of friends and play a lot of golf together, and that helps.
Definitely. So for most of your run with the Memphis Grizzlies, you've done TV work, and one of the things that has, I guess, been a big factor for your preparation and the importance of these games, as you've mentioned, these games aren't just going to Memphis fans. They're going all across the country, NBA League Pass, everywhere in the world, really. Someone, if they want to tune into a Grizzlies game, they can tune in. Do you like to feed off that extra pressure that not only you have from fans screaming behind you at FedEx Forum, but you also have, people from around the world tuning into these broadcasts? How does that motivate you now doing TV work for Memphis on a game-to-game basis during a season?
That's a really good question. I don't know that it's additional pressure. Honestly, it's a little easier for me because sometimes you are, as a team broadcaster, you're in a situation where management is pushing you to, our team doesn't commit any fouls and the referees are out to get us. And fortunately, our production team, our management in Memphis is, no, be honest. If there's a bad call that benefits us, go for it. If there's a bad call that benefits the other team, you're free to point it out. And I've developed a lot of good relationships with referees,
Mm-hmm.
which is another piece too that I would tell you and tell all your viewers and listeners. Know the rules backwards and forwards. I mean, there's nothing more important than knowing the rules. But I just prefer to be an honest broker anyway, and just, look, if that was a good play, it's a good play. It's a bad play, it's a bad play. Good call, bad call. Call it what it is.
Mm-hmm.
I would prefer to do that than try to be over, the Harry Carey, overly homeristic broadcaster. That's even a word. So I don't see it as pressure. I see it as a responsibility.
Yeah.
I think more than anything else, that even though everybody understands we want the Grizzlies to win, and we're more excited when John Morant does something than when Devin Booker does something, that's understandable. But if Devin Booker does something fantastic, we need to recognize that. And it's my comfort zone to be middle of the road, slightly tilted to the Grizzlies.
That's great to hear. Honesty is the best policy. We hear about that. And it's great to just point out the great plays from either side, no matter if that's your team. Something that comes up with me is, and you mentioned John Morant, the team's getting better. The Grizzlies are getting better in the standings. They've had a few down years. So we talked to the LA Kings announcer the other day, Alex Faust, and the LA Kings used to go from a great team, and when he came in, the team hasn't been as good. Have you found like a new motivation or like a new almost confidence in your work as the team has gotten better, as the team has a chance to win on a night-to-night basis?
Well, it makes our job a little easier in the lean years for the Grizzlies. I would tell Brevin, let's celebrate the game. And in some games, when the Grizzlies weren't very good, you were talking more about the other team, and you were doing a lot of educating. I don't know that I think that probably, I would say, Dylan, there probably is a little bit more energy because we know that something amazing could happen. We are also very cognizant that when Ja does something sensational, we are very knowledgeable of the fact that how we call that is going to live on forever in social media. And so you go into games now almost expecting there to be a signature call somewhere, somehow. And that's a little different because now you're expecting and understanding that your words can live on for a really, really, really long time. I mean, the dunk against Aaron Baines of Phoenix, that one, I remember by the time we got on the bus, there were hundreds of thousands of views with our call on it. I had calls from friends and family around the country saying, hey, I heard you on SportsCenter. So there's a greater obligation and responsibility to make sure you nail those big moments, because with Ja, there probably are going to be more than there would be otherwise.
It's funny because this Memphis Grizzlies team has always been known as a tough defensive team over the past few years with a lot of great, tough faces on it and a really great team camaraderie thing. But it's been a really short rebuild, and all of a sudden you have John Morant, Jaren Jackson, Brandon Clark, Dylan Brooks, these young players who look to lead his team into the future. But one guy that I don't think gets enough national shine is Taylor Jenkins, the head coach, who'd spent some time in Milwaukee and also with Mike Budenholzer on a couple of his staffs. What is your relationship like with him in those pregame meetings over the past year? What are some of the things that, maybe the casual NBA fan doesn't know about the new head coach for the Memphis Grizzlies?
Well, he comes from the San Antonio system, as you point out, and the San Antonio system, and it's not just Greg Popovich and it's not just Tim Duncan, but I remember a couple of years ago, San Antonio, when they put out their media guide, didn't put a player on the cover. They put one word: family. And that is a huge, huge thing with Taylor Jenkins. He feels it is very important to make your players understand how important they are as people, not merely as basketball players. When my mom was sick and in the hospital and in the process of dying, he would always check in. How's your mom? Can how are you doing? Is everything okay? And even during the pandemic, I mean, he's texted me. He's like, hey, how you doing? How you hanging in? And with a young team, he has been able to set a culture, but it hasn't been, I'm going to set a million rules here, and that's going to be our culture. The culture is, I care about you as a person. Yes, you play basketball, but I care more about you as a person. And that has, I think, gotten more out of players sooner than we expected, just because of the relationship that he has with a young guy like John Morant and Jaren Jackson Jr. And I've been very, very impressed with him, with the way that he's handled everything. And it was, I did get, when I was doing summer league last year for NBA TV, I had one of the Bucks executives come up to me and say, "You don't know it yet, but you guys made just one amazing hire with Taylor Jenkins," and we're starting to see that.
Definitely.
That's great to hear. And you pointed out before with the social media and how it's been so crazy with the NBA, and they do a great job of it. Really the best out of the top 4 sports in the U.S. I mean, you see a highlight every day on ESPN's Instagram, Snapchat, whatever you get your highlights on. Do you feel like almost an added pressure, like you said, just when a big play comes, you know that millions and millions are going to watch that play over and over again, not just to see the dunk, but to hear your call as well?
Oh, there's absolute pressure and a sense of responsibility that we need to nail it. So yeah, I mean, you go into it, like I said, because of how good this team is now, you go in expecting that there could be one of these moments that's going to live on forever. If you have a middle of the road team and not a very exciting team, you're thinking, well, maybe if we get a buzzer beater or a good dunk or something like that. But with Ja and Jaren and the young athleticism of this team, you realize that there's a good chance almost every single night you're going to have something that's going to live on in social media for quite a while.
So going back to more of the play-by-play aspects and the ins and outs of the job, one thing that's very important with you, or when I've listened to some of your broadcasts, is you're very authentic, and you don't sound like it's, you memorize the script at the beginning or you memorize lines, but it comes off the dome. And something Dylan and I hear a lot is, you have to have your own voice. You can't, you can feed off different inspirations, but you have to be you when you're calling a game. How important is it for you and for all broadcasters out there to have their voice? And just how important is it, you can tell when somebody's not being authentic at home, but how important is it for you to do that night in and night out?
Well, it's hugely important. If you are not excited about the game, if your voice does not portray excitement about the game, the viewer's going to pick up on it. Like, well, if the guy who's sitting courtside watching John Morant's not excited, well, why should I even watch? Mm-hmm. But to your point about being authentic, what the advice that I give young broadcasters is to find guys or gals, Beth Mowins and some of the others that do play-by-play. Yeah. Find people that you like to listen to and sit down and really understand, what is it that they do that makes them so good? Why do you like watching them? Why do you like listening to them? Because most of us in the business, we're pretty savvy with what audiences would like or what they want to hear. And then you have to deconstruct a little bit. If you like Ian Eagle, okay, what do you like about Ian? Do you like the fact that he's got a quirky sense of humor and will drop the pop culture reference? I mean, is that why you like him? If you like Kevin Harlan, why do you like Kevin Harlan? Is it the way that he uses his voice almost as a musical instrument where he can create drama just by the tone and inflection of his voice? Or do you like Doc Emmerich because of his vocabulary? So you go through these things and you try to figure out, okay, well, I like this person, and the reason I like them is this. And then you understand what elements are important to you and probably going to be important with a lot of listeners as well. And then to the extent that you can incorporate those things into your own call while being authentic and not trying to copy Ian Eagle, not trying to copy Doc Emmerich, trying not to copy Kevin Harlan, but to somehow take the best of them and incorporate it into what you do and to be authentic.
Absolutely. I mean, being authentic is so big. You point out Doc Emmerich, one of my favorites. I don't think I can use the vocabulary that he does, but I'm working on it. I'm reading through the dictionary. So the question I have, and this is the last one for me before we head over to Ian for our last question that we asked to all of our guests, is let's say you're in the Memphis Grizzlies, you're in the Western Conference, you like to travel a lot. I mean, Memphis isn't really on the West Coast. They're in the Western Conference. Give me one or two of your favorite arenas to go to.
I mean, I still like to go to, I call it the Rose Garden in Portland, not Moda Center. And it's because it used to be my home.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful arena, great sight lines, very knowledgeable fans, great PR staff. So I always enjoy going there. And in the Eastern Conference, I always single out Bankers Life Fieldhouse. It is one of the best venues in the NBA. It's very user friendly because, look, I focus on the important things. There's a big enough desk, and I don't have fans that are like 2 feet behind me. I mean, there's good separation there. You can walk around, and again, great sight lines, very knowledgeable fans, great PR staff, great tech crews. So I mean, if I had to pick one, East and West, those would probably be the two.
Yeah, people sometimes forget that broadcasters need their space too. And I always see these NBA broadcasts. And I'm like, how are they doing the game with fans screaming down their back? But thank God there's a few arenas out there who are broadcaster friendly. So as Dylan mentioned, our one last question that we do ask every broadcaster, and you already mentioned a piece of advice earlier, but if there's one or two pieces of advice that you'd give young broadcasters trying to break into the industry right now in sports broadcasting, what would that be that they should carry with them every day?
Okay. It's network. Network. You have absolutely no idea how things will work out. And let me give you a story here.
Yeah.
I've been doing fill-in for the Detroit Pistons, and the executive who hired me there had moved on to the Portland Trail Blazers. And but I still couldn't get a full-time gig. He couldn't work out anything in Portland for me. And one night I'm in Chicago working at a travel company and, hoping to get into the NBA. And he calls me and he says, "Can you get to Portland for a game tomorrow night?" What? Well, what had happened is the Grizzlies at the time, ironically, the Grizzlies were in Vancouver at that time. They were not televising the game. It was only on radio. Don Poyer was the radio and TV voice of the Vancouver Grizzlies.
Yes.
And he had lost his voice. And so, and Vancouver had no backup. They had no idea what to do. And so Harry Hutt was the executive with Detroit and then now Portland. And he said, I got a guy. And so on my own dime, I flew out to Portland. I left on Southwest Airlines at 6 a.m. And for those of your listeners who know about Southwest Airlines, I went Chicago, Kansas City,
Jesus,
Orange County, Oakland, Portland, and never had to change the plane. I was on one plane the entire time. Finally, the flight attendant said, "Look, are you sure that you're supposed to be on?" I said, "Yes, I'm supposed to be on." I think I got to Portland like 4:00 in the afternoon.
Oh, no.
Nominal prep that you could actually do. And even though Don had lost his voice, he insisted on sitting at the table with me and Jay Triano, who was the color commentator. And Don insisted on introducing me after every return from break. A, he had no voice, and B, he mispronounced my name every single time. No matter how many times I corrected him off air, he always gave it the wrong way. So I do the game, and Don thanks me and, gives me some money for doing the game, and I go back to Chicago. Well, I had done my time with the Portland Trail Blazers. Paul Allen had cut 88 people from the staff, including me. I was trying to get back into the NBA. And one of the jobs that was open in the summer of 2004 was the radio job for the Memphis Grizzlies. Don Poyer was going to move to TV exclusively. They needed a radio voice when Don was on TV. So I interviewed with the VP of broadcasting, and I later found out after I had gotten the job, Don called me, and he said, well, our VP of broadcasting called me and said, I'm talking to these 3 guys. Do you want to weigh in? And Don said, hire Pete. He filled in that one night for me in Portland, and we always had a good laugh about it when he was with the Blazers and I was with the Grizzlies, and we always chatted about it. Seemed like a really, really good guy, good broadcaster. So, you're the decision maker, but if it's my call, it's Pete. So just to know, no matter who you run into, under what circumstances you run into them, they may end up playing a very, very large role in your life. So network to the best of your ability, and just be a good person. Be a good person, be a good broadcaster, be a good networker, and I'll leave you with one other piece of advice, bonus piece of advice from Don Criqui.
There we go.
When I was a kid at Notre Dame, I wrote him a letter because Don's class was 57, I think. And he said, those who work hardest and want it most get there. So want it, work hard, and you get there. It's a pretty good formula, but it's very, very competitive. And I wish you guys very well in your broadcasting careers, because it's a great field. It's a lot of fun. It's very competitive, but those who work hardest and are best prepared are going to rise to the top.
There's some great pieces of advice, Pete. And, we're definitely going to live by that. And, that one simple favor you did, flying to 100 different cities, it seems like, just to get to Portland to call that one game, might have not seemed like a lot, but in retrospect, it got you the job in Memphis. And that's where you've been for the last decade and a half, doing fantastic work with the Grizzlies. Dylan and I can't wait to hear you, hopefully when the NBA resumes in July. Thank you so much for your time.
Great. Thanks for having me, guys. Good luck to you.
Thank you.
This has been another episode of Beyond the Whistle podcast with Pete Pranica, Dylan Pescatore. I'm Ian Nicholas. See you next time.